Hello, welcome to today's session. I am Dr. D. Fatima Rani of English Department from CHSD St. Teresa's Autonomous College for Women. Today's topic for discussion is Introduction to Communication. This is part of Unit 1. As you all know, communication is a very important topic for every student. So, hope you are very interested to listen to what is communication. Let's see what is communication. Communication is the activity of conveying information, and the word communication has derived from the Latin word communis, which means to share. So it's basically it involves a sender, a message, and a receiver. So this is a basic understanding of communication. So we need three things in communication: the sender, the message, and the receiver. And this is communication is conveying message, which the word communication, communis, as derived from the Latin word. Let's see the definitions of communication by different people, and many have given their definition of communication. But let's take two examples here. Orway Ted, what he said about communication is a composite of information given and received, of a learning experience in which certain attitudes, knowledge, and skills change, carrying with them alterations of behavior, of a listening effort by all involved, of a sympathetic fresh examination of issues by communicator himself, of a sensitive interaction of points of view leading to a higher level of shared understanding and common intention. So this is Orway Ted's definition of communication. As you all know that giving a sender's information is very important, and where the receiver understands it, and this is done in a process. So the understanding and the effort of listening and the knowledge skill of carrying information, all these are important according to Orway Ted. In the definition is given in what is communication. Next, G.Z. Brown, he says that communication is transfer of information from one person to another. So this is a basic understanding of communication. So information from one person to the other, whether or not it elides confidence, but the information transferred must be understandable to the receiver. So whatever I am conveying to you, it should be very much understandable, so that you understand it and you again send information to the person. So these are the two definitions of the communication given by two different authors. So communication is as old as human civilization. Yes, without communication, so there is no growth of a human civilization. Man used to communicate with his fellow beings by means of sounds, signals, gestures, and when there was no language developed. So you must be thinking how the communication started in the initial stage. So we know that even now under non-verbal communication we get this signals, gestures, and the sounds. The minus communication, human society could not have been as it is today. So if there was no communication, there is no development. It is communication which has transformed mankind into the most developed, rational, and prosperous group on earth. So because of communication, there is a rapid growth in this mankind, in the prosperous way on the earth. So we see the examples here. There are three examples taken, and this is non-verbal communication examples for it. So beating a drum, and how pigeons used to carry letters, and the beacon fire. So in the first example we see How the beating of a drum conveys communication. It is used to warn others. So even today we find this non-verbal communication when it's a beating of a drum is conveys something as a warning. Next, pigeons used to carry letters. So in olden days, maybe it's now communication is very easy through emails. So technology has grown so much, but in the beginning days we know that it is through the birds. Next, the beacon fire is it is used to call for help. So if there is a fire, it signifies as a non-verbal that somebody needs help. So this is how the civilization has grown up so much because of the development of communication. Let's go for the components of communication. So as you see here, the components of communication are sender, message, self concept, listening, receiver, feedback, and barriers. So, without these components, the communication is incomplete. Let's see in a elaborate way. Sender. Communication is always complex two-way process involving sender and receiver. So as you all know, there is no communication without sender and receiver. So it's a complicated because it involves two, both sender and the receiver. Next, message. Message is the element that is transmitted from one person to the other. So it's very important. So it should be given by one person and received by the other. So it involves both verbal and non-verbal message. So in a message we can also, as we already in a previous clip we have seen that how non-verbal works. So it's both verbal and non-verbal. So through these two methods we can send message. Self-concept. A person's attitude and views affect the way she communicates with others. So first of all, I should have understanding, then I can send the message very easily. Listening. Listening, integrating physical, emotional, and intellectual process and is much more complicated than hearing. So I hope you know the difference between listening and hearing. So in communication, it's not hearing, but you should listen carefully so that you can send message very meaningfully. Then the receiver. The receiver receives the message and decodes the message and assign a particular meaning to it. So what is the work of a receiver? When he receives a message from the sender, so he decodes it and then he understands and assign a particular meaning to it. Then the feedback. The receiver communicates back to the sender his or her understanding of the message. So once I receive a message, I understand it and then I give the feedback. So, and there are even barriers. Anything that comes in the way of communication, exchange. So usually we find there are many barriers in communications unless the sender, receiver, and the message listening, everything is perfect. There won't be proper communication, and sometimes even the barriers involved in the communication. So these are the components of communication. Next, we'll see how the process of communication goes. Communication is a continuous and a dynamic process involving more than one person. It is a cyclic process denoting continuous flow of information. It essentially involves sender, message, and a recipient. So, as in the figure, you see how the process goes and how it starts and how it continues. The sender conceives ideas and encodes them into suitable medium, which means facts, figures, and pictures, sends them through appropriate channel. Maybe present days we can say that it is through emails and also through phones and through speech we can send this. And next, the recipient decodes the message, understands it, and encodes feedback and sends to the sender, and the process continues. So in the figure, as you see the how it starts. So the channel, there is a source, the channel starts, so the message goes to the receiver and then through the channel it goes to the feedback. So this is how the process continues in a communication. The process of communication. Hope you are following. So this is the topic is on communication. Hope you are receiving what I am sending to you. Here you are a receiver and I am a sender. So what happens in the process of communication? Communications refers to a set of techniques used for expressing ideas effectively and the technology of transmission of information by print or telecommunication media. Communication lexically meant to be imparting or exchanging of information by speaking, writing, or using some other medium. It is the act of conveying intended meaning from one entity or group to another through the use of mutually understood signs of semiotic rules. Hope you're able to follow the figure here. So, how the process is done. A sender, he communicates his ideas and encodes, and then the proper channel, the recipient receives and decodes and gives the feedback. Even in the previous pictures, you could follow how the communication goes through to one person to other. Even here, through the process, we understand better how this process continues. The importance of communication in business. So we see the importance of communication in business too. The importance of business can be assessed as follows. One, the communication is needed to establish and disseminate the goals of a business organization. Any organization or institute or something, communication helps the organization in arriving at vital decisions. It also helps a lot of planning and coordination. It is a basic tool for motivation, and an increase in the morale of employees largely depend upon the effectiveness of communication. It helps a business as means of bringing about maximum production at the lowest level by maintaining good human relationship in the organization. Hope you are following all the points. So they are very clear that how the importance of communication in business. It works as an effective link between branches of organization situated at great distance. We'll see what are the barriers of communication. Communication is not always successful, as we all know. Several things can prevent the message from reaching the intended recipient or from having desired effect on the recipient. There may be some fault in the communication system which may prevent the message from reaching. Some of these defects are in the mechanical devices used for transmitting medium. Some are in tools we use for communication, that is language, and some are in nature of persons who are engaged in communication, the sender and recipient, the receiver. It can be divided into three broad areas, that is listening, speaking, and environmental. So barriers, certain barriers here are mentioned. There are psychological barriers, physical barriers, attitude barriers, and perception barriers. We'll see the listening barriers. Suppose when I am giving lecture here, then unless there is a proper listening, you cannot get the subject what I am teaching here. So what could be the listening barriers here? First one is interrupting the speaker, not maintaining eye contact with the speaker. So if there is lack of eye contact, there is a chance of barrier. You cannot understand, so that could be called as a listening barrier. Rushing the speaker to complete what she or he has to say, making the speaker feel as though she is wasting the listener's time, being distracted by something that is not part of the ongoing communication, getting ahead of the speaker and completing his or her thoughts. Sometimes we interrupt the person through whom we are getting some message. So that could be a listening barrier. Ignoring the speaker's requests, topping the speaker's story with one's own set of examples. So I think you easily follow what I'm saying here. Forgetting what is being discussed, asking too many questions for the sake of probing. So all this could be the listening barriers in the process of communication. Sometimes unclear message. So while speaking, there could be some barriers in speaking too. So unclear messages, lack of consistency in the communication process, incomplete sentences, not understanding the receiver, not seeking clarification while communicating. All this comes under speaking barriers. Next, environmental barriers include an individual subjective viewpoint towards issues, people, which leads to assumptions. An emotional block, which can lead to an attitude of indifference, suspension, or hostility towards the subject. An emotion block or bias that is based on the third party's viewpoint or what you have read or heard. Words can have different meanings to different people, thus blocking communication. Use of negative words. So these are all environmental barriers. So I think you understand. So sometimes use of negative words give miscommunication, and sometimes blocking communication. So when you interrupt people, there will be a block, and sometimes sender's point of view may not be understood. So even then, that becomes a environmental block. So we have seen different kinds of blocks where communication gets interrupted. The next point is the factors that influence communication. Body language, very very important. Tone of voice and gestures. So even as students, you have this experience. Whenever you are asked to say something, to address people or address your own friends, you have to follow all these factors in when you are talking to some people or conveying some message. First one is body language. Posture is part of our body language. For example, if I was walking to a boy I liked, I would be facing towards him and chatting. However, if anybody was not facing towards him, this just suggests that I am not really interested. So you know that unless my body, this is non-verbal. My body speaks, the way I stand, the way I address. So all this is the influence, the factors that influence in communication. So however, if they are leaning forward, this implies that they are not interested. So what are the postures that makes you understand that you are not interested? So the way you stand, sometimes people may lean and listen or talk. So even that talks about the which interrupts. So body language is very very important in communication. Tone of voice. Our tone of voice is really important in conversing. For example, if you talk really fast and loud, this may suggest that you are angry. However, if you talk in a slow, calm voice, then this shows that you are rather being friendly. So you should know the pulse of the audience to whom you are talking to, whether you are addressing your friend or some class or some unknown group. So accordingly, you need to have the tone of your voice. Next, gestures. Gesture is the movement of the arm, hand and head used to help us understand what a person is trying to say. So sometimes you may just stand erect and you may talk to the audience. Then, so this counts. The gesture is very important. The way you nod your head and move your hands. For example, when I am trying to communicate but speech is not possible, people use hand gestures. And the common hand gestures are the peace sign, the index, the middle finger raised and apart, OK gesture, closed fist held with the thumb. Hope you all know, isn't it? So all these are, maybe without talking, I can give this communication through my gestures. So these are all the factors that influence communication. So once again I repeat, the body language, the tone of voice, and the gesture. So dear students, this is introduction to communication. Under introduction to communication, we have discussed many points like the factors that influence communication and the barriers we have in communicating with others, and also different people, what are the definitions they have given about the communication, and also we have importance of business communication and the process of communication, how the channel is gets processed, and also the components of communication, and how both verbal and non-verbal communication helps to understand, and the definition. So with all this, I hope you understood the introduction to communication, and in coming sessions we will have more elaborate class about communication. Thank you very much for listening.